The Cheonma Gala was not the kind of event you received an invitation to. You received a notification. A single line of text on cardstock so heavy it felt like a warning. The venue changed every year. The guest list never leaked. The dress code was black, and the unspoken rule, the one every single person in that ballroom understood without being told, was this: you did not make a scene. You did not raise your voice. You did not do anything that might draw the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. 600 guests stood in the Grand Seihan Hall on a Friday night in November. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung overhead, throwing light across silk and diamonds and the careful, practiced expressions of people who had learned long ago that showing too much of anything could get you killed. Ryu Seojun was standing near the far wall when he saw her. He almost did not notice. He had trained himself not to notice things that were not his business. In his world, attention was a form of claim. You looked at something too long and suddenly you owned it, or it owned you. So he had spent 11 years at events like this, seeing nothing, registering nothing, speaking only when required and saying only what needed to be said. But then the sound changed. He did not hear the words at first. He heard the quality of silence that followed them, the particular collective intake of breath that moved through a room the way a cold front moves through open water, fast, total, impossible to ignore. Seojun turned his head. Across the ballroom, near the curved edge of the East Terrace, a man was standing over a woman. The man's name was Do Hyun-sik. Seojun knew him. Mid-level importer connected to the Cheonma through 3 layers of legitimate business, the kind of man who wore his access to dangerous people the way some men wore watches, as proof of something. He was not important. He had never been important, but he was loud and he was drunk and he was screaming. The woman was not screaming back. She was standing completely still. She was wearing a plain dark dress, no jewelry, natural hair pinned up in a way that suggested she had not planned to be looked at tonight. She was holding a small notebook against her chest, the researcher's instinct, Seojun would think later, to hold on to the one thing she could control. Her face was completely composed, not numb, not frozen, composed. The way a person looks when they have taught themselves over a very long time that no reaction is the safest reaction. Seojun recognized that look. He had worn it for 11 years. He did not know who she was. He did not know why she was there. He did not know what Do Hyun-sik was screaming about. And at that exact moment, standing against a wall at a Cheonma Syndicate gala, with the most dangerous man in Seoul standing 40 feet away watching him, he could not afford to care. And yet, Do Hyun-sik grabbed her arm. The notebook fell. No one moved. 600 guests in black tie watched a woman's notebook hit marble and did not move. Seojun saw 3 people actually step back, widen the circle, give the scene room to happen. He knew why. He understood calculus. Getting involved with something connected to the syndicate, even something as simple as stepping between a drunk man and a woman he was hurting, was the kind of decision that could restructure your entire life. People did the math fast in rooms like this. They always chose correctly. They chose themselves. Seojun set his glass down on the nearest tray. He walked across the ballroom. He did not rush. He did not make eye contact with anyone along the way. He moved the way he always moved, like a man who had already decided exactly what was going to happen and had simply come to collect the outcome. He stopped 2 steps away from Do Hyun-sik. The man did not notice him immediately. He was still talking, still gripping the woman's arm, his voice rising in that particular register that drunk men use when they want to sound powerful and only manage to sound afraid. Seojun said nothing. He waited. The woman looked up and saw him first. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds. No plea in them, No relief, just an assessment, clear, calm, and unsettlingly precise, the kind of look that took in everything and gave back nothing. Then Do Hyun-sik noticed the silence had changed and turned around. His face went through 4 expressions in under a second: recognition, confusion, fear, and then the particular ugly performance of a man who is terrified but cannot afford to show it in public. "This does not concern you," Do Hyun-sik said. Seojun looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman's arm, at the man's hand around it, at the faint red mark already forming on her skin. He looked back at Do Hyun-sik. "You leave her alone," Seojun said. His voice was not loud. It was not even particularly sharp. It was the flattest, most ordinary sentence in the room. 4 words, spoken so quietly that the guests nearest them had to lean in to hear, and the entire Grand Sehon Hall went silent, not because of the words, because of who said them. Because Ryu Seojun, the man who ran Cheonma's financial architecture, who had never once in 11 years inserted himself into anything that was not directly his domain, who moved through these events like a ghost and left the same way, had just walked across a ballroom full of dangerous people to stand between a drunk man and a stranger in a plain dark dress. And nobody in that room, not a single one of the 600 guests, knew what to do with that. Do Hyun-sik let go of the woman's arm. He took a step back, then another. His mouth opened and closed once, and then he did the only sensible thing a man in his position could do. He turned around and walked away as if he had somewhere else to be. The crowd exhaled collectively. Seojun did not watch him go. He bent down and picked up the notebook from the floor. He held it out. The woman looked at the notebook for a moment, then she took it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than it should have been. Seojun nodded once. He turned to leave. "You just made a very powerful enemy tonight, for a stranger." Seojun paused. He looked back at her over his shoulder. "He was never going to be a friend," Seojun said. He walked back toward the wall. Behind him, 600 people started breathing again. And Ryu Seojun, for reasons he would spend the rest of that night failing to explain to himself, did not stop thinking about the woman in the plain dark dress and the way she had looked at him like she already knew something he did not. If you have ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone, if you have ever watched someone get hurt and wondered why nobody moved, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Hit like, subscribe, because what happens next is going to change the way you think about what it means to be chosen by someone who owes you nothing. 30 minutes after the moment that should never have happened, it was already too late to take it back. Seojun returned to his corner of the ballroom and stood there exactly as he had before, glass in hand, back to the wall, eyes moving across the room without seeming to. Yoon Chanu appeared at his left elbow within 3 minutes. That was how it worked between them. Chanu never rushed, never caused a scene, but he was always there, quiet and precise, when something needed to be said. "You want to tell me what that was?" Chanu said. He was not looking at Seojun, he was looking at the room. "No," Seojun said. "Okay." A pause. Baek Oh-sung saw it. Seojun's grip on his glass did not change. "Of course he did," Seojun said. "He is watching you right now. He has been since you walked back. He has that look." Chanu did not need to describe the look. They both knew it. It was the look Director Baek wore when he was assembling information into a shape he could use. Across the room, the woman in the plain dark dress had straightened her shoulders, tucked the notebook under her arm, and accepted a glass of water from a server who had appeared beside her with the careful attentiveness of someone who had witnessed something unsettling and wanted to help without getting involved. She drank half of it, set it down, looked at the room around her with the expression of a person deciding whether to stay or go. She stayed. Seoyun did not know why that registered. "Who is she?" he said. Chanu was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, long enough that Seoyun noticed. "Chanu?" "Zora Calloway," Chanu said. 29, Black American, cultural artifacts researcher. She is here on a 2-year research fellowship with the National Repository of Cultural Records. She was brought in tonight by the Seoul Foundation's curatorial team. They commissioned 3 historical items for the gala display in the East Hall. She is here to oversee their installation and removal. She has no syndicate connection, no record. She is completely clean. Seoyun looked at him. "You already knew who she was." "I looked her up when you started walking toward her," Chanu said simply. "It is my job to know who you are walking toward before you get there." Seoyun turned back to the room. "Why was Do Hyun-sik touching her?" "That I am still working on." The gala continued around them. Music resumed. Conversations restarted with the slightly too loud energy of people determined to pretend the last 5 minutes had not happened. At the center of the room, Director Baek Oh-song stood with 2 associates, a glass of champagne held loosely in one hand, and he was smiling at whatever someone had just said to him. But his eyes were pointed directly at Seoyun. Seoyun had been in this organization long enough to know the difference between surveillance and targeting. What he felt on the back of his neck right now was not the first one. "How close am I?" he said quietly. "To finish. 8 weeks, maybe 10. The documentation package for the prosecutor's office is 70% complete. If we move too fast, we expose the gaps. If we wait too long, he closes the gap for us." Seoyun finished the thought. Neither of them spoke for a moment. On the other side of the room, Zora Calloway set down her water glass, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked calmly toward the East Hall, back to the artifacts, back to her work, back to the world she had come from. She did not look back at Seoyun. He watched her go. And then Chanu said, "There is something else, about the woman, about why Do Hyun-sik had his hand on her. Seoyun, she was not at the installation by coincidence. She requested this assignment 4 weeks ago, by name. She asked specifically to oversee items connected to the Cheonma Foundation's cultural collection." He paused. "I do not think she is as clean as her file says. The truth about a person is never in what they show you. It is what they came looking for." The East Hall was quiet in the way that expensive, old things tend to make a room quiet. Glass cases stood at measured intervals, each one lit from below, each one holding something the outside world had been told no longer existed. Zora stood in front of the 3rd case from the left and did not touch the glass. She had learned a long time ago that the most important things you are not supposed to have are always kept in plain sight. The trick was not finding them. The trick was making sure no one watched you find them. Her hands were not shaking. She was proud of that. The object in the case was a ledger. Hand-bound, 1987, its cover worn to the softness of old skin. It had been catalogued by the Seoul Foundation as a historical artifact, a record of trade and cultural exchange from the period of Korea's industrial expansion. Provenance, private collection. Donor, anonymous. Zora knew what it actually was. She had spent 4 years figuring it out. The ledger was a financial record, not of culture, of names, of payments made to officials, judges, police commissioners, and prosecutors spanning a 30-year period. A record that, if authenticated and delivered to the right hands, would not merely damage the Cheonma Syndicate, it would end it. Every name, every number, every transaction that had allowed an organization built on violence and silence to operate in the light. Her father's name was in it, on the wrong side. That was the part she had not told anyone. That was the part she had been sitting with for 4 years, turning over in her hands like a stone she could not put down and could not carry. Her father, a man she had adored, a man who had coached her little league team and driven 4 hours to every one of her college debates and told her on the night before he died that truth was the only inheritance worth leaving, had spent 6 years in Seoul as a trade liaison, and during those 6 years, his name had appeared 11 times in Cheonma's payment records. A man who had preached honesty like a religion had been on a criminal syndicate's payroll for more than a decade. She needed the ledger, not to use against him, he was gone. She needed it because it was the only way to make what he had been part of mean something different than it currently meant. She needed to give it to someone who could use it correctly. The problem was that she had just spent the last hour watching the most controlled man in the room cross a ballroom full of dangerous people to say 4 words to a drunk stranger on her behalf, and she did not know what to do with that yet. "You are still here." She turned around. Ryu Seojun was standing in the entrance to the East Hall. He was not blocking it, he was simply there, the way he seemed to simply be places without apparent effort or announcement. "I have a job to finish," Zora said. "So do I," he said. He walked into the room slowly, looking at the cases as he passed them with the expression of a man who had seen everything they contained before and found none of it surprising. "How is your arm?" he said. "Fine," she said. Do Hyun-sik has a habit of using his hands. He has done it before. No one has ever said anything. "I know," she said. He stopped, looked at her. "You know him." It was not a question. She had not intended it to be. "I know of him," she said carefully. "I have seen his name in records, cultural acquisition records. He moves things for the foundation." Seojun was quiet for a moment. What kind of researcher requests a specific assignment at a Cheonma-connected gala? He said. His voice was not accusatory, it was simply precise. Zora looked at him for a long time. "The kind who knows exactly what she is looking for," she said. The room was very quiet. Seojun looked at the 3rd case from the left, at the ledger inside it. He looked back at her, and something shifted in his expression, not warmth, not alarm, but the specific recognition of a man who has just realized that the stranger he stepped in front of a crowd for is not actually a stranger to any of this at all. "You have 4 minutes, Seojun quietly, before Baek Oh-song sends someone to check on what is taking the researcher so long. Whatever you came here to do it now. I will be in the corridor, and when you are done, you are going to tell me everything. Every life has a before. This was the moment hers became an after." She used 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Seojun stood in the corridor outside the East Hall with his hands in his pockets and counted the footsteps of the 2 men Chanu had texted him about, Baek Oh-song's associates, making their sweep of the upper floor in the methodical way that men who do not want to be noticed almost always are. He heard the door open behind him. Zora stepped into the corridor. Her notebook was in her hand. Her expression gave nothing away, but her breathing had changed, slightly shorter, slightly higher in her chest. She had done something. He did not ask what. "Walk with me," he said. Not in order, not quite, something in between. She walked. They moved through the corridor at the pace of 2 people who knew exactly where they were going, which was the most effective way to appear invisible in a building full of people who were watching everything. Seojun chose the route by instinct, left at the secondary stairwell, away from the main floor, toward the quieter eastern wing where the catering staff moved and the guests did not. When they reached the landing, he stopped. "Talk," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He could see her doing the calculation, how much to give, how much to hold back, what it would cost her to trust a man who existed, by every available evidence, on the wrong side of every line she had spent 4 years trying to draw. "My name is Zora Calloway," she said. "I am not just a researcher. I have been working, alone, without institutional support, and without telling anyone, including my sister, on a documentation project. The Cheonma Syndicate's financial records go back to 1987. The items in that hall tonight are not just cultural artifacts. 3 of them are carriers. The Foundation uses them to move encoded documents between collection points. I spent 2 years in Atlanta building the academic framework for this. The last 4 I have spent in Seoul following the physical trail." Seojun said nothing. "The ledger in the 3rd case," she said. "I photographed every page. I have the full record. And you came here alone, without telling anyone, without backup, to photograph evidence inside a syndicate-controlled event. Yes. Do you understand what they would do to you if they knew?" She held his gaze. "I understand better than you think." He looked at her for a long time. The corridor was empty. Below them, the gala continued. Music, crystal, the careful performance of a world that ran on silence and money and the willingness of ordinary people to pretend they did not see what they saw. "Why?" he said. 4 years. Alone. Why?" She was quiet for exactly 1 breath. "Because my father is in that ledger, and because the only thing I can give him now is the truth about what happened to him. Not what he did, what happened to him. The way they find people when they are in debt or in fear or in the wrong place, and the way they make sure those people can never leave." Her voice did not break. It stayed exactly level. That was what undid him. Not the story, the composure. "You are going to tell me," Seojun said carefully, "who you were planning to give this to, after tonight." Zora reached into the inside pocket of her notebook cover and withdrew a folded card. She held it out. Seojun took it. He read the name on it and went completely still. The name was his contact inside the prosecutor's office, the one no one in the syndicate knew about, the one he had spent 3 years cultivating in total secrecy. "How do you have this name?" Seojun said. His voice was still quiet, but something behind his eyes had shifted, and Zora Calloway, who read people for a living, saw it immediately. "Because," she said, "whoever gave it to me told me that if I ever found myself at a Cheonma event in danger, and a man crossed the room without being asked, I should trust him." She paused. "I did not know your face. I only knew what you would do. Trust is not built in safe rooms. It is built in corridors, at midnight, when you have no other choice." They found Cheonwoo in the secondary stairwell 2 floors down, exactly where Seoyun had told him to be if anything changed. He was leaning against the wall with his phone in his hand, and he looked up when he heard their footsteps and did not look surprised to see Zora with Seoyun. That told Seoyun everything. "You knew," Seoyun said. Cheonwoo pocketed his phone. "I suspected," he said. 4 weeks ago, when her assignment request came through the Foundation's archives portal, I ran a deeper search. She had accessed 17 public records connected to Cheonma financial subsidiaries over the past 4 years. The pattern was too specific to be academic. I reached out to our contact at the prosecutor's office. "You gave him her name," Seoyun said, and he confirmed she had already approached them independently 6 months ago with parcel documentation. They told her the file was insufficient, that they needed primary source material, not copies. So she came here to get it herself. "She was already going to do it," Seoyun said, "with or without us. I did not tell you because I did not want you to stop her, and I did not want you to help her either. You are 8 weeks from the finish line. Getting involved in an outside operation, She is not an outsider, Seoyun said. Chanu looked at Zora. Zora looked back at him with the calm, unhurried expression of someone who had already survived the part of a conversation that was about her. No, Chanu said quietly. She is not. Seoyun turned to Zora. The photographs you took tonight, the ledger pages, they are on your phone? Encrypted and already uploaded to an external server, she said. If anything happens to my phone or to me, the package transmits automatically in 48 hours. Chanu made a sound that might have been appreciated. She set up a dead man's switch, he said. 4 years of working alone teaches you contingencies, Zora said. Seoyun looked at her for a long time. He thought about the 11 years he had spent building contingencies of his own, the files he had copied, the records he had duplicated, the careful architecture of a secondary life built quietly inside the one he lived publicly. He thought about how alone that work had been, how long the nights were when you could not tell anyone what you were doing or why. He thought, this woman did that alone, for 4 years, for her father. Something in his chest moved in a way he did not have a name for. The problem, Seoyun said, interrupting whatever Seoyun was about to say, is that Do Hyun-sik is going to report the incident to Baek Oh-song tonight. He has no choice. He cannot let it sit. And when Baek Oh-song hears that the researcher from the East Hall left the event early in the company of Seoyun, he will know something is wrong, Seoyun said. He already suspects something is wrong. This will confirm it. Chanu looked at both of them. We have until morning before he moves. The stairwell was cold and very quiet. Zora looked at Seoyun. I did not mean to do this to you, she said. It was the first thing she had said that was purely personal. I knew tonight would be complicated. I did not calculate a variable I could not control. I am not a variable, Seoyun said. She almost smiled. Almost. Chanu's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and for the first time in 4 years of working beside Ryu Seojun, Yoon Chanu's hands were not steady. Baek Oh-song just had Do Hyun-sik taken into one of the private rooms. He is not asking about the incident. He is asking about what the researcher was photographing in the East Hall. Someone told him, someone who was in that room and saw her. When the walls start closing in, you do not feel it as pressure. You feel it as time, running out. They moved. Not quickly drew attention. They moved the way Seojun had always moved, with purpose and no visible urgency, through the service corridor of the Grand Sehon Hall, toward the rear exit that opened onto the hotel's underground parking level. Zora did not ask where they were going. She kept pace with him exactly, her notebook in her hand, her breathing controlled. He noticed she had tucked the notebook inside her coat, protecting it without being obvious about it. The researcher's instinct again. Chanu was on his phone 3 steps behind them, talking to someone in a voice too low to hear. My sister knows I am here tonight, Zora said quietly as they turned into the lower corridor. She is visiting from Atlanta. She flies out Sunday. I told her I would be back to the hotel by 11. What time is it? Seojun said. 10:42. He nodded. Call her when we are in the car. Tell her you will be late. Tell her nothing else. She will know something is wrong. Yes, Seojun said, but she will be safer not knowing what. Zora was quiet for a moment. She already worries too much about me, she said, not a complaint, just a fact. Does she know what you have been working on? No, she knows our father died with debts that were not entirely his own. She does not know how far it goes. Seojun said nothing. He understood. Some truths were carried alone, not because you were unwilling to share the weight, but because you loved the people around you too much to ask them to carry it with you. The underground level was cold and smelled of exhaust and concrete. A black car was already waiting. Chanu's work, Seojun assumed. The driver stood beside it and said nothing. Seojun opened the rear door. Zora paused. Last time someone opened a car door for me, it was my father. I was 8 years old. He made me feel like I was worth the gesture. The sentence landed in the space between them and stayed there. Get in, Seojun said gently. We have approximately 40 minutes before Baek Oh-sung figures out we are not in the building. She got in. He got in beside her. Chanu climbed into the front passenger seat and immediately began a second call. As the car moved out of the underground level and into the Friday night traffic of Seoul, Zora looked out the window at the lights sliding past. My father used to say, she said quietly, that the most dangerous thing you could do was nothing, that silence was not safe, that choosing to look away was still a choice. She paused. I hated that he said that and still did what he did. People are not consistent. They know the right thing and do not always do it. They do the wrong thing and still love the people they love. That is not a weakness. That is just what people are. She turned and looked at him. Do you believe that? She said. He thought about the 11 years he had spent living inside an organization he was destroying from the inside, the people he had pretended to be loyal to, the lines he had walked right up to and stopped before crossing, the ones he had not stopped at. Some days, he said honestly. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to the window. Chanu lowered his phone. We have a problem. Baek Oh-sung did not send his associates after us. He sent them to her sister's hotel. Zora Calloway, trauma surgeon from Atlanta. She is in Seoul visiting Zora for the week. She's checked into the Mapo Grand Hotel. He turned around in the front seat. He already knew who Zora was before tonight. He's been watching her for months, and he's not trying to find Zora. He's trying to make sure she comes to him. The cruelest thing the powerful do is not hurt you directly. They reach for the people standing beside you. Zora did not make a sound. That was what stayed with Seojun afterward, that she did not gasp, did not cry out, did not do any of the things that people did when they received news that rearranged their world. She went very still. Her hand, which had been resting open on her knee, closed slowly around the notebook. Then she said, very quietly, How long? Before they reach her hotel, 11 minutes, Chanu said, maybe less. Zora looked at Seojun. There was nothing behind her eyes that was asking for permission. She was not asking him to do anything. She was simply looking at him with the full and terrible clarity of a woman who had just been told that the one person she had spent 4 years protecting was now the leverage. Driver, Seojun said, Mapogu. The car changed direction. Zora took out her phone and called her sister. It rang twice. Zora? Zora Calloway's voice came through the speaker, warm and sharp in the way that only older sisters can manage simultaneously. The particular voice of a woman who has been quietly tracking her younger sister's silence all evening. It is almost 11. Where are you? Imani, Zora said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. I need you to do something right now. I need you to leave the hotel. Take nothing except your room key and your phone. Do not use the elevator. Take the stairs to the lobby, go out through the side exit, get into a regular cab, not a hotel car. Go to the Han River Park entrance at Mapo Bridge. Text me when you are outside. A pause. Imani, Zora, please. And that single word, please, from a woman who Seojun had not once heard ask for anything, said everything. A silence. I am already moving, Imani said. The call ended. Zora sat with the phone in her lap. Seojun looked at her profile, the straight line of her jaw, the faint tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself together with exactly the right number of threads. She will be okay, Seojun said. You do not know that, she said. No, he agreed, but Chanu has 2 people outside her hotel in 4 minutes. They will get to her before Baeko Song's associates do. Zora looked at Seojun. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Not tonight at the gala. I understand tonight. Instinct, impulse, whatever it was. But this, getting your people involved, redirecting resources, putting yourself between Baeko Song and a woman you met an hour ago. Your sister flew from Atlanta to spend a week with you. She does not know what you have been building here, but she knows something is wrong. She came because she was worried. She does not deserve to become leveraged." Zora closed her eyes for a single second. "Of course she did. The women in your family," Seojun said, "have a habit of carrying more than they tell anyone." Something flickered across Zora's face, not quite a smile, something older and more complicated. "My father used to say the same thing." He meant it as a criticism. The car moved through the lights of Seoul at night. The city looked exactly the same as it always did. Indifferent, enormous, glittering with 1,000 lives being lived simultaneously, each one contained and separate and utterly unaware of what was happening in a black car on its streets. Chanu's phone buzzed. "She is out," he said. "Imani Calloway is in the stairwell. Our people have eyes on her." Zora exhaled once, slowly. Seojun watched her do it and felt something he could not afford to feel. Then Chanu said, "We have a second problem. The photographs Zora uploaded tonight, the server she sent them to." He turned around. "Someone accessed it 6 minutes ago. Not us, not the prosecutor's office. Someone with syndicate-level clearance and a key that should not exist." He looked at Zora. "Someone already inside your operation has known about this for a very long time." Zora did not speak for a long time. The car was on the bridge now, the Han River spreading dark and wide on both sides, the city's reflection breaking and reforming on the water below. "The server was private," she said finally. "The address was known to 3 people. Me, my contact at the prosecutor's office, and the person who gave me the original tip. The one who pointed me toward the ledger 4 years ago." "Who gave you the tip?" Seojun said. She told him the name. Seojun went quiet. Chanu in the front seat stopped moving entirely. The name she had just said was a woman, Ryu Seojun, 47, former legal counsel for the Sehan Foundation, who had resigned 3 years ago and subsequently become a private consultant. A name that appeared in Seojun's own files, a name he knew well, a name he had trusted with pieces of his own operation that he had never trusted to anyone else. "Seojun," Seojun said, quietly. "You know her," Zora said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. He thought about the conversations, the documents she had helped him organize, the contact information she had provided, including, it now appeared, his own prosecutor connection, which she had given not only to him, but to a researcher 4 years ago, without telling either of them the other existed. He thought about the 8% of his documentation package that was still incomplete, the part he had been waiting on Seojun to help him finalize. "She connected us," he said slowly, "on purpose, without telling either of us." "Why?" Zora said. Seojun thought about it for exactly the length of time it took to cross the rest of the bridge. "Because we needed each other," he said. "I have the financial architecture, 3 years of embedded records from inside the syndicate, but I do not have primary source documentation from the 4 I joined. You have the ledger. The pre-existing paper trail goes back to 1987. Together, the 2 files create something complete, something the prosecutor's office cannot refuse." He looked at Zora. "She was building the case through both of us at the same time, keeping us separate until the moment we would need each other. She did not tell us about each other because she was afraid that if she did, one of us would pull back. Zora stared at him. She was right, Zora said. If I had known who you were, if I had known you were Cheonma, I would never have gone near me, Seojun finished. Yes. A long silence. But the server access, Zora said. If So-yeon gave us to each other, then who accessed the photographs? Chanu turned around from the front seat. So-yeon's personal device has been compromised. Someone has been reading her communications for at least 6 weeks. Everything she knew. He paused. Baek Oh-song did not guess. He was reading her mail. The full shape of it assembled itself in Seojun's mind the way bad news always did. Not all at once, but piece by piece, each one slightly worse than the last. Baek Oh-song knew about Zora. He knew about the ledger. He might know about the prosecutor's office. And if he had been in So-yeon's communications for 6 weeks, he possibly knew about Seojun. Seojun's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. The voice on the other end was smooth and unhurried, and exactly as Seojun had known it for 11 years. Seojun said director Baek Oh-song. I think it is time we had an honest conversation. Don't you? Some conversations are not conversations. They are verdicts, dressed up in the language of patience. Seojun held the phone against his ear and looked out the window. Director Baek, he said. Where are you? Baek Oh-song said. You left the gala without saying goodbye. That is not like you. I had something to attend to. Yes, I noticed. A pause, the kind that was designed to be felt. The researcher, American, interesting woman. Her file is very clean. Too clean, really, which is itself a kind of information. Seojun said nothing. I have been watching you for some time, Baek Oh-song continued. His voice held the calm of a man who has already made a decision and is simply narrating the distance between the present and its execution. You are very good, Seojuna, very patient, but patience has a shape, and I have had a long time to learn your shape. What do you want? Seojun said. What I have always wanted, clarity, order. The organization is running as it should. He paused. Give me the woman. Whatever she took from the East Hall tonight, the photographs, the file, whatever she built, give me all of it and walk away. I will consider tonight's incident a misunderstanding. I will not ask what you have been doing for the last 3 years. We will both return to what we are. Seojun was quiet. In the back seat beside him, Zora was looking at the phone in his hand. She could not hear Baek Oh-song's words, but she could read something in Seojun's face, something that most people would have missed. A stillness that was different from his usual stillness. The stillness of a man who has arrived at the edge of a decision he has been building toward for a very long time. And if I do not, Seojun said, then I stop being patient, Baek Oh-song said, and I am much less interested when I stop being patient. Seojun looked at the river, at the lights of the city, at the 11 years of his life that had been lived in the margins of someone else's power, quietly, carefully, building toward a single moment. He thought about Zora in the East Hall holding her notebook against her chest. He thought about her father's name in a ledger and what it had cost a woman to spend 4 years holding that knowledge alone. He thought about what his contact at the prosecutor's office had told him 3 years ago when he first made contact, that the only way the case would ever hold was if it was airtight, complete, primary source to present day, no gaps. He thought about the 30% of the documentation package that was still incomplete. The ledger Zora had photographed tonight was 30%. Director Baek, Seojun said. I want you to write down a number. A pause. What number? Seojun said it. A file number. The case number registered with the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office 3 years ago under a sealed submission that would only be made public on receipt of the final documentation package, the one that was 70% complete as of tonight, which was, as of 30 minutes ago, 100% complete. Silence on the line. Then Baek-oh-song said very quietly, "When?" The package transmitted automatically when Zora's backup trigger was activated 20 minutes ago by the person who accessed her server. You completed the file for us, Director Baek. When your people broke into the server, the dead man's switch read it as a hostile access and transmitted everything, the ledger, her photographs, and my 3 years of embedded records, all of it, together, delivered tonight. The line was completely silent. The morning papers, Seojun said, will be interesting. He ended the call. The car was quiet. Zora was staring at him. Your files, she said slowly. You had files. You were... Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long time. How long? She asked. 11 years inside, 3 years building the case against them. She closed her eyes. I opened them. You were doing the same thing I was doing, from a different direction, toward the same end. Zora looked at her hands, at the notebook in her lap, at the city outside the window. When she looked back at Seojun, something in her face had changed, not broken open, not collapsed, something quieter than that. Something that looked for the first time like the beginning of an exhale she had been holding for 4 years. My father, his name, in the prosecutor's file, will it... She stopped, started again. Will it show what they did to him or only what he did? Seojun held her gaze. Both, he said carefully. The full picture, not just the transactions, the coercion, the years of it, the way they found people and did not let them go. He paused. Is that enough? And Zora Calloway, who had not cried once in 4 years of carrying this, felt the first tears reach her eyes and said nothing at all. The end of something terrible is not always loud. Sometimes it just stops, and you have to learn to stand in the silence. The arrest of director Baek-oh-song was made at 6:14 the following morning. It was quiet. No cameras, no announcement, 2 prosecutors and 4 officers at the door of his residence in Songbuk-dong. He opened the door himself, which surprised everyone, though it should not have. Men like Baek-oh-song always preferred to control the moment of their surrender, to make it look, for as long as possible, like a choice. Seojun watched the confirmation come through on Chanu's phone and said nothing. They were in a safe house in Mapoko, a 3rd-floor apartment that smelled of old paper and coffee, which Chanu had used twice before in the 11 years of this operation, and which Seojun had always found, privately, to be the most honest-smelling place he knew. It smelled like work, like waiting, like the kind of room where people sat with their hands empty and their minds full, counting down towards something they could not yet see. Imani Calloway had arrived at 2 in the morning with the composed, decisive energy of a woman who had spent the cab ride from the river park, deciding that panic was an indulgence she did not have time for. She walked into the safe house in the same clothes she had worn to dinner, took one look at Seojun, one look at her sister, and said exactly what a trauma surgeon from Atlanta says when she walks into a room and needs to understand it fast. Somebody start talking, she said, from the beginning, and do not leave anything out because you think I cannot handle it. They had explained, all of it, the ledger, the photographs, the parallel operations, 11 years, the 3 years, the father's name and what it meant and what it did not mean. Imani had listened without interrupting. At the end, she had sat for a long time with her hands folded in her lap. "You did this alone," she had said to Zora. "For 4 years, you carried this?" "I was trying to protect you," Zora said. "I know," Imani said, and then, more quietly, "That is the most Zora thing I have ever heard." They had held each other for a moment in the kitchen of the safe house, while Seojun stood in the hallway and looked at the wall and did not feel like a man who had just finished something significant. He felt like a man who had been holding his breath underwater for so long that surfacing felt wrong. Too bright, too open, too much air. Morning came the way it always did, gradually, then all at once. Chanu took Imani to get coffee from the bakery 2 streets over. They had been gone for 20 minutes. Seojun and Zora were in the main room, the file on the table between them. Not Zora's notebook, which she had held all night, but the printed summary Chanu had prepared at 4 a.m., the confirmation of transmission, the case number, the date. It was over. Or it was beginning to be over, which was the same thing but felt entirely different. "What happens to you now?" Zora said. Seojun looked at the table. A period of testimony, protected status during the prosecution. After that, he paused. "I am not sure. I have spent 11 years knowing exactly what I was doing every day. I am not certain I know how to do something else." "You will figure it out," Zora said. "You sound certain. You crossed a ballroom full of dangerous people to pick up a stranger's notebook. People who do that generally figure things out." He looked at her then, really looked at her in the way he had not allowed himself to look in the stairwell or the car or any of the hours since, with no calculation, no strategy, no distance maintained for tactical reasons. She looked back. She was not smiling exactly, but something in her face had opened. Whatever she had been holding closed for 4 years, whatever door she had learned to keep locked because the rooms behind it were too full of grief and responsibility and the specific ache of being loved by a man who had also failed her, that door was cracked. Not open, cracked. That was enough. "My sister is going to be insufferable about this," Zora said. "About what?" "About you." She said it plainly, without inflection. "She is already calculating something. I could see it on her face when they left." Seojun looked toward the door where Imani and Chanu had gone. "Chanu is the same," Seojun said. Zora almost smiled again. This time she let it reach her eyes. "We should probably disappoint them," she said. "Probably," Seojun agreed. Neither of them moved. The morning light was coming through the window now, pale and clean, the specific quality of early light in a city that is still deciding what kind of day to be. It fell across the table, across the file, across the confirmation that something terrible had been measured and named and finally handed to people who could carry it forward. Zora picked up her notebook. She held it for a moment. Then she set it down beside the file. It was the first time all night she had let go of it. Seojun noticed that. He did not say anything about it. That was the right call. Some things did not need naming. The door opened. Imani came back with coffee. Chanu came back with bread. The safe house filled with the smell of both, and the ordinary, improbable warmth of 4 people sitting around a table in the early morning after a very long night. And Ryu Seojun, the man who had spent 11 years becoming exactly what the world needed him to be, who had carried the weight of a double life across a decade without once setting it down, who had walked across a ballroom full of dangerous people because a stranger's notebook had fallen and no one else was going to pick it up. Ryu Seojun sat down and stayed. There is a version of this story where no one moves, where 600 people watch a man grab a woman's arm in a ballroom and choose in the same silent moment to look away. That version happens every day. What changes a story, what changes any story, is the single person who decides that looking away is a choice and that they are not willing to make it. Not because it is safe, not because they know how it ends, but because some things cannot wait for safety. Some things have to happen now, in this moment, with the information you have and the courage you can find. Zora carried her father's truth alone for 4 years because she believed no one would help her carry it. Seojun crossed a room because something in him refused to stay still when it should not. Neither of them knew what the other was doing. Neither of them knew how the night would end. They were simply two people who had decided, separately and for entirely different reasons, that silence was not an option they could live with. That is the lesson this story leaves. Not that the world will reward you for doing the right thing. It may not. Not that every risk ends safely. It does not. But that the person you become by choosing action over silence, that person is someone you can live inside without being afraid of yourself. Zora did not need saving. She needed someone to stand beside her long enough for her to do what she already knew how to do. That is the most important kind of love. The kind that says, I see what you are already doing. I am here. I am not leaving.